And thanks, Serena. We've deliberately called this session a workshop because, it's a small group. We hope that we can have a lot of dialogue and interaction with one another. And so I'm Latika Nirula. I'm the director of the Center for Faculty Development. I'm here with Serena Iannelli, who is also here from the same center. We're at the Center for Faculty Development here in Toronto, Canada. We'll tell you a little bit more about our center, but, Serena's also on the line in case you are interested to hear more, get connected to some links and resources. If you have any questions that pop up in the chat, she'll kind of keep an eye around that. And as Dwayne has already learned, she is what makes things happen. So I was smart to make sure that I had her a part of the session. So we're hoping to really talk about how we can bring solution-focused approaches to the space of clinical environments and the work that experienced practitioners may engage in this environment. And so some of you may be clinical teachers, some of you may be working with clinical teachers or faculty. And so this is kind of the space in which we're talking about the complexities of coaching. And so just to give you a bit of an insight into our environment, our center is a partnership actually between a clinical space, so a hospital, as well as the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto. And so even though we're situated in the medical school and within a hospital, because of that nature, we actually support all of the health professions. And we support people across a variety of roles, in terms of enhancing their roles and functions as leaders, scholars, advocates, and teachers. So a lot of the programming that we offer at the center is interprofessional by nature. And I kind of set a little bit of this context because a few years ago, we actually ended up developing a coaching-based program at our center because we were getting more informally referrals around teaching performance. And, while we have a breadth of offerings in terms of supporting faculty, those weren't the folks that were coming, right? So it's always like preaching to the converted. And so how do you engage faculty who may not recognize that there's a problem? Or if they do, they're uncertain about where to go for teaching support. And so we launched the Enhancing Teacher Performance Program, which was meant to be a solution-focused, coaching-based program to support faculty who were looking for remediation related to their teaching performance. And some of the folks that we see within the program are coming through a referral pathway. So they may be referred by their chief or their chair. It could be various, sometimes it's the vice president of education in their hospital. So it's very different kinds of pathways of referral. And then we also have faculty who self-refer, who start to see kind of patterns in their teaching evaluations that, have them feeling quite uncomfortable, uncertain about how to proceed. And so there's space for folks from either kind of, an entry point. And with that, of course, is inherently a different level of motivation and engagement, right? To kind of embrace the coaching process, depending on, how they've been referred and what that experience has been for them. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of that context for you, because I think that's important to kind of understand why we're coming to this particular conversation today. So what we were hoping to do in this workshop is about kind of delineating a little bit of the hats that we wear in these spaces. So thinking about what we mean by coach, how that differs maybe from mentorship, how that might differ in context of clinical supervision is further complicated for those of us who also have clinical backgrounds and maybe are therapists. And so how it's not therapy. And so how do we enter into a lot of that kind of variety of spaces depending on the hats that we wear? I imagine that this group is probably very exposed to solution-based focused kind of models and approaches, but the one that our center has been largely influenced by is the Dialogic Orientation Quadrant model by Hae-Sun Moon. And so we actually use that as a way to start to think about our coaching conversations. And what we were hoping to do with you today, and with Serena's help, we kind of developed, and members of our team, we developed a bit of an interactive activity to kind of look at different conversational turns and how we can use a solution-based kind of approach to kind of understanding these kind of, I guess, clinical teaching performance dilemmas and challenges. And then I'm hoping that from our conversations today, which will be co-created with all of you, is, you walking away from today thinking about one or two ways that you might try to approach coaching someone in your current context, perhaps a little differently. And so I'd love to kind of invite your ideas around that as well. All right. So let's talk about what we mean by coaching in the clinical context. So, I mean, what you see sort of with the check marks should not be really a surprise to people who've attended this conference. We're talking about how we maximize someone's performance. We liken this to kind of enhancing performance in any domain, whether it be athletics or anything else. It's really about that helping rather than teaching approach. It is really that art of facilitating performance, learning, and development, and thinking about this idea of self-directed learning, which is a really important piece of empowering them as adult learners to take greater agency around finding the solutions and approaches to their problems. And then, you know, I have the other side to sort of say what it isn't, which it isn't therapy, it isn't mentorship, and it isn't training. And I see for sure that there is an irony in me saying it this way because, you know, we're talking about clinical teaching and you're probably asking yourself, well, doesn't clinical teaching involve training and like active teaching? Doesn't it involve aspects of mentorship? And when a learner is in difficulty, we may have to go through different kinds of referral pathways related to their wellness. And so all of this to say that this is a very shades of gray area. It is fraught in terms of the nuances, the terminology that we use. And for sure, I see it in the coaching interactions that I have with faculty, that it can be very challenging to kind of navigate what we're talking about, depending on the lens and the hat that they're wearing. So I want to open it up for some dialogue with all of you around now when we talk about it in the context of clinical supervision, you know, what comes up for you? How can we think about coaching within this context? Or what examples of that, you know, have you seen? So we're a small group, so just feel free to share.
Do you mean the faculty members' clinical supervision of learners?
Yes.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So how might you be coaching in a context like that, in the context of clinical supervision? Or do you see that as quite different?
I see clinical supervision as coaching, ideally, although you're also evaluating people, which is not ideal for a coach, but the skills I use in coaching are the skills I try to use in that kind of clinical teaching and classroom teaching, to be honest. And I think it's possible to coach faculty members as they're doing clinical supervision, either you know, at a separate meeting or live supervision of supervision, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Pamela, I saw you came off mic for a moment there. Did you have any additional thoughts? I think you also are a clinical supervisor yourself. Did I have that correct? You advise students?
You're talking to Pam?
Yeah, sorry, I misspoke there. Pamela, do you have ideas around this in terms of your own experience with clinical supervision? It's part of the test to see if we can actually get audio working for us on Zoom. There you are. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you too. All right. So thoughts about, took us a bit there. Thoughts about clinical supervision. I know that I believe you supervise students, so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
I supervise students and postmasters, associates. And just as you're asking the question, I was switching devices so that I could sit in a more comfortable place.
Gotcha.
So I have to be honest, I missed a couple minutes there.
Yeah. So the lead into this is really to say, we're wearing lots of hats in this space where we're interacting with learners. So on one hand, you know, as Dwayne's saying, that for sure you can bring a coaching approach to those conversations with learners, whether it even be in a clinical supervisory kind of capacity or even in classroom teaching. So there is a space for it. But we're also acknowledging that you may at times be in an evaluative position as well, which adds a layer of complexity when we think about coaching in that regard. Wondered if you had some additional thoughts about that.
Well, I think even with the evaluative portion and the I'm your employer and I'm supervising you and we have all these different roles together, we discuss those roles. And, you know, maybe quite clear about, so I'm going to put this hat on now and I'm going to ask you a few questions. But I think that all of those roles can also be, you can have a solution focused lens for them and bring that solution focused mindset and process to the conversation, so they feel, I think, more similar. The different roles, they feel more similar than they might in a more hierarchical setting, you know.
Thank you.
So I'm asking, you know, what's working, what would you like more of, whether I'm talking about, you know, the clinical work that we just watched together, or I'm talking about what they want employment wise in the next 6 months.
Yeah. And I've talked to other faculty about this tension. Many, like, and Serena and I had an opportunity to do a longer version of this workshop with some of our clinical faculty at our center. Many talked about this kind of being a bit challenging when they're wearing the kind of evaluator hat and wanting to still have a very developmental and open conversation. And sometimes that these two things feel at odds with one another. And so the question was asked to the group, and I'm curious to hear, you know, how many of you reconcile that. Because so what do you do? And I shared that sometimes I find that I have to label conversations, right? And say, okay, so this is a conversation that we're going to have that I love it to be a little bit more exploratory and open-ended, because we're acknowledging that we are wearing different hats in our interactions together. And so this will feel different than the kind of conversation that I might have with you end of rotation, where I'm having to like fill out your evaluation. You know, that's not good. It's not going to be the same kind of conversation. That one might feel a little bit more directive. Yeah, so, or, you know, that conversation might feel even different if we were meeting 2 years from now and you're contemplating as a medical student now moving into a residency area and you want to get my advice on something. You know, that might be more of a longitudinal relationship that we now have that moves more in the mentorship realm, where I'm doing some advice giving and sharing some of my expertise and my own experience, which we tend to hold back on as coaches. So anyway, it was just to acknowledge that this can be a bit of complex terrain. And, you know, part of what sometimes gets in the way is, you know, our ability to think cleanly and mindfully in these coaching conversations. And I've noticed this a lot with our clinical faculty, that many of them are used to kind of being in the diagnostics realm, right? The mindset. So thinking like, I'm here to diagnose the issue, the problem. We do start with the problems. We thrive on understanding the problem. And also being able to offer our solution, or in turn, our expertise. And it's almost like that monster that's sitting on your shoulder, that advice-giving monster that you have to kind of squash and say, wait, no, I'm going to have to move that distraction away and really focus in this moment about what you want. Like the client, or in this case, in our often cases in the clinical teaching environment, our learners who are telling us what they may need or want. And it may be different than what we think from our own experience as their preceptors or supervisors. And so those are some of the distractions that can often kind of enter in. I'd love it if you want to share in the chat other thoughts you have of some of the distortions that kind of come into play when we're trying to listen cleanly and mindfully. You know, I sometimes hear that clinical faculty see something of themselves in their own career path and journey in their trainees. And so there's this like compulsion to kind of bring that into the more mentoring kind of realm of sharing their own experience. And then are we really listening, right? Truly and fully to what the client or the learner's narrative is. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment and invite any comments, questions, thoughts, reactions, reflections, any of that.
I think I'd love to comment. I think for me, there's been, it's kind of I've been a therapist for 30 some years. And so as a therapist, I stay very solution focused, and that's that's a pretty predictable path. With my supervision, I've done that, less long. There's a sentence for you, and it took me a while, and I still find myself being advicey, teachy, when I perhaps would be better suited to shift into being curious about what they think is working, or ideas they have, and I do some of that, but I recognize that I could be a step further up the scale too by doing more of it.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a really honest reflection. Any other thoughts, reflections, comments from others?
I lots of them, right? So I'll see if I can edit them. I think sometimes there's either an unconscious or I should say subconscious or unexamined theory of what a person is and how learning happens, or what it means to learn, without trying to understand the learner's preferences for learning. There's also, good research on the mismatch between what supervisors think is useful feedback and what learners think is useful feedback. And it gets in the mind of listening cleanly and mindfully if you don't know what's meaningful to the learner, right, in terms of feedback. So having those conversations early to clarify, gosh, I like to give advice and correct. Is that useful learning for you? Well, no, I need to debrief what I'm experiencing and I need to reflect on insights. Oh, okay, well, I need to be different in that case. Or, well, you're wrong. That's not what supervision is. We're going to do it my way, which I wouldn't encourage, right? But there are supervisors who do that. So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind.
Yeah, it's so critical part of that orienting the learner kind of phase that happens, right? It's a little bit of the learning contract, right? Between faculty and learners, and that negotiation, that dance that we have to do around how do you like to give and receive feedback? How are we going to work together? I mean, those are some of the same norm settings that we do with the clinical team, but we have more time for that and we maybe aren't as explicit. So yes, you're right that without that clarity, that actually can lead to more distortion as you go down this path. Sure. Okay, so we're gonna play for a little bit as a small group here. I'm going to share with you in a moment a scenario that is hopefully something that resonates with those of you who are in academic health settings. So in setting the stage, this is a typical setup, right? We often have a colleague who's like, I'm having some issues with a learner. Can we come talk about it over coffee? And that's kind of what's happening here. So I'll read the scenario to you, and it's also there on your screen. So you are meeting with a colleague who shares with you that they would really appreciate chatting about some challenges that they've been experiencing with a learner they're currently supervising. They work in a hospital clinic that takes on students. They share that they've become increasingly frustrated with what they see as unprepared and unprofessional students. With the increasing clinical demands on them, they're wondering if they're even cut out to teach on top of everything else. They're meeting with you for coffee in a private office to chat further about this. All right, go with the scenario. Any questions that we need to clarify at this stage? Okay. All right, so now what we're going to do is, I don't know if some of you have had, this could be a North American cultural thing or more pervasive, so I'm going to test this out. Growing up, I used to read these choose your own adventure books where you would have different branches and pathways to the story. So you'd have to choose option A, B, or C, and then it would take you to another page and a different outcome. And so we're going to do that with this scenario. So I'm going to present you with a various number of kind of conversational turns that we can take as coaches. And so the first one is, how do we begin? You're sitting with us in front of us with this coffee. And these are 3 choices that I put forward. I'm not saying that these are good. I'm not saying that we couldn't have said them better, or they could be better in terms of phrasing around solution focus. Some of them have some of the trappings that we often fall into as coaches. And there could be other possibilities as well. So if you want to suggest something in the chat that's novel, that's not one of these 3 choices, that's fine, because we want to be generative. But have a look at A, B, or C. And if you feel like you would choose one of those options. Serena is going to kind of eyeball the chat. So if you want to throw your vote in a direction, feel free to put it into the chat, and she'll kind of look at the frequency and kind of make a call. So Serena, I'm letting you make the final call.
Sounds good.
So option A is, it's so nice to see you. What are your hopes for our conversation today? Such that maybe even later on today, you'll feel that was helpful to you. Option B, nice to see you. You mentioned that you've been really struggling with students lately. I've been thinking about what you shared with me when we last spoke. Is this a pattern that you've seen with other students that you've supervised in the past? And option C is, so good to see you. I've been thinking a lot about what you shared the last time we spoke. It sounds like your challenges with students lately have been really hard on you. Can you tell me more about what has been particularly difficult? So these are all things that we might say potentially.
We also have Dwayne in the chat. Two things that stand out for me from our original conversation: your frustration with students and your thoughts that maybe teaching isn't your gig anymore. Which of those do you want to focus on? Or is there something else that would be useful? Option D.
Interesting, yes. Yeah, so picking up on what they shared in their past conversation. All right, but I've only built my algorithms for these three choices for now. Sri and I have only taken our sophistication with PowerPoint so far. So we're gonna kind of have to get you to vote for A, B, or C. But I like your suggestion as well, Dwayne. So thank you for sharing that. And I think we should continue to share other options too, because these are all just different ways that we may frame things or think about this.
A seems to be the overwhelming answer.
Sorry, which one, Serena?
A.
A, okay, let's go with A. All right, this is what happens. All right, so we ask our question, and our client or our friend here, colleague says, I'm really hoping to decide if I should even be a clinical teacher. I'd love to be able to figure out how to work with the student more effectively, or determine if it's really if it's really me that needs to rethink this whole clinical teaching thing. So in some ways, Dwayne, your intuition was interesting because they're kind of grappling with sort of both simultaneously, right? We're getting some insight around that. Okay. All right, now we can explore more. So what do we think? These are three more options, but again, please feel free to add to the chat other things as well. And again, Serena will be eyeballing the chat to see if there's any votes that you want to throw in a different direction this time, or so option A is, what might it mean for you if you could be more effective as a clinical teacher? So it's kind of focusing on one area right now. B is, have there been some strategies that you've tried with students that have helped with them to come more prepared and engaged to learn? And C is that sounds really tough. And I can totally relate with that too. It is very hard to feel disrespected by your student. Do you feel that there was something useful that you learned from this experience in spite of how hard it's been? What do you think?
Will you repeat A, please?
Sure, of course. A was, what might it mean for you if you could be more effective as a clinical teacher? Sorry, Pamela, go ahead. Are you going to say something?
She asked to repeat the question.
Oh, she asked to repeat.
Yeah.
Sorry. I can't always follow the screens go on here.
It looks like A is the most popular answer in the chat.
Okay. All right. I think we're in a room of a lot of solution-focused practitioners because there seems to be a trend here. Okay, there we go. This is the option for A. That would be amazing. I'd feel like I would be making a real difference and inspiring someone to be as passionate about patient care and this profession as I am. So before we move on to the next conversational turn, I just want to give people a chance to sort of reflect on what they're hearing. What's striking you right now as a coach, or what might you be thinking about next?
This person values making a difference and inspiring people.
Mm.
This person also wants the student to be as passionate as they are, or to be passionate in the ways they define passionate.
Hmm. So what might you be curious to explore more about as a coach? And this is for everyone, the group, anyone.
I think I'd want to know what they have noticed that has kept them doing it up to this point. So it's going to be, you know, instances of their preferred future.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether it's what is the learner doing, or what are they doing, and probably ask in both ways, you know, when they do that, what is it that you're doing to support that kind of interaction?
Love it.
I think this is getting at some of the same stuff as Pam, but from a little bit different twist. I would want to know what would shift for you, or what would be different if you felt like you were making a difference and inspiring someone. Identifying, I mean, not emphasizing, inviting them to expand on or amplify the identity piece of what they're saying, to help kind of create the future of, oh, I'd be thinking and feeling about myself in these ways. Because we've quickly shifted away from I'm frustrated with students to I'm frustrated with teaching. And I'm concerned about myself. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Margaret, I see your head nodding. Do you have anything else to add, or other questions that are surfacing for you?
Yeah, I think I would, I get them to expand a bit more about what they're saying here. Tell me more about a real difference, and just getting them to expand a bit more on it. Yeah.
All right, so let's go to the next, which is the next opportunity here, which was what might you ask to get a sense of the solutions that they might see? And you can offer up your ideas in the chat, because these are, as I said, we're limited by the powers of our PowerPoint to just give you 3 options. And we know the possibilities are endless. So if there's something else that you might consider asking, throw it into the chat. This will just help all of us. But these were a few options here to consider. Option A is, what might be the first signs that you might see that things are improving? So we kind of had an example of that one before that we could pursue. Option B, it is amazing how you've continued to push forward in spite of these challenges. What have you learned about yourself through these interactions with learners? Okay, and then option C could be, sounds like it was helpful to get the perspective of your colleague as well on their experiences with students too. So who else or what else has helped you through this, to get through this? I think there's a typo there.
We have a couple of comments. One's a B, one's an A, but then Dwayne says, tell me a story about a time you felt like you were making a difference and inspiring passion in a student.
Love it. Okay, it's a bit of a split decision, so I need a couple more of you to throw your votes in a direction. Is that another one for A?
Yeah.
All right, let's go. Yeah, sorry.
I was thinking A or B.
Yeah.
Which, because I think both could have fruitful outcomes. So.
All right. Well, the beauty is that we can go back and see what would have happened if we chose B. So I'll give you that as an option, Pamela. So we'll try A first, and since that was the majority, this is what the A response is. That they're integrating my feedback and making effort to review each clinical case prior to meeting with a patient. And maybe if they were unprepared, maybe to step back from participating. Do you want to see what they would have said if they chose the other option? Let's have a look. I'll go back. All right, so if they chose B, we would get this additional information. I realized that I actually like teaching. I might not be the best at it, especially with learners who are less motivated or prepared, but I really do want to make a difference as a clinical teacher. All right, I got some more layers to this. Thoughts? Share with me what's kind of forming for you as a coach in this moment.
I think this takes me into that conundrum that I face of, oh, well, I want to know what motivates the learner, but I'm not talking to the learner. I'm talking to the person who's working with the learner.
Yeah.
But what do you suppose the learner is motivated by? But I don't know if that's a useful piece or not.
Margaret, do you have some thoughts about that, or even what were you thinking?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like Ham just said, it's the person we're working with is actually this teacher. We're not working with the student, so it's supporting that teacher to kind of drill down a bit more and understanding, well, what's the dilemma coming up for them, right? And then helping them sort through that, and then giving them supporting them to identify their own path forward. So I think what's interesting about this response is that the person's first question was, I don't know if I'm good enough to do this job, but apparently they have that passion for the job. So for me, it's continuing along this line of pulling more from what they've learned and helping them to expand how they can continue to do what they're doing and not be sidetracked by the student's behavior.
Jacqueline, I haven't had a chance to hear from you yet, so I wanted to just check in. Are there questions, curiosities, additional thoughts that are coming up for you? Oh, you're on mute. Oh, we can't hear you. Still on mute.
Sorry, I was just writing there because I guess I was building on what Margaret was saying. It's that idea that I'd actually kind of reframe back and go, so you like teaching and you want to make a difference. So I'd be kind of adding the next piece to that. So next piece to that would be, and who would notice? Perhaps, or what would you notice about yourself?
Yeah.
If what would you notice about yourself? So you like teaching and you want to make a difference. So if this were happening, if this continues to happen, what would you notice about yourself? And then what would you notice about your students?
Love it. Yeah, so really getting them to kind of articulate their preferred future quite vividly, actually.
Yeah, and I guess it's building on what Margaret said, that it's not so much about the students per se, because it's the person who's in front of you who is working with the students. Yeah,
and that's a bit of the trick, because some of us have had some of these experiences, right? So it's again with that advice monster on our shoulder, because there's a little bit of like pure curiosity about what's happening there, or I can relate. And so, but we need to know what their experiences and what their motivations are as a clinical teacher, not necessarily what we see maybe in them. And it gets complicated when it's a peer, right? And we may have seen some of these moments of them really making a difference, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, they're being so hard on themselves. Like, I've actually seen you really shine. So yeah, but we want them to kind of describe that.
Yeah, and it might even be the question. So when you are making a difference, what does that look like?
Yeah. All right, well, let's see the next turn. Here we are. So how might you get a sense of their goals at this moment? These are three options to kind of explore in that realm. So option A is, what is something that you might try even in your next conversation with this learner? Option B, what are things that you've already seen that might give you a sense that you could work with this student still? And option C is, what is becoming clearer for you as a result of our conversation and your reflections on the situation? Well, slightly different framings, but you gravitate to any one of these, or do you have other thoughts about where this could go?
Looks like most folks in the chat are saying C.
All right. Okay. All right. C it is. Oh, did it jump? Yeah, it jumped. Sorry. Let me just go back. This is C. So again, our question was, what is becoming clearer for you as a result of our conversation and your reflections on the situation? Your colleague says that I'm going to need to put in more time and effort to build my repertoire of teaching skills. What I'm doing hasn't worked, and if I really want to have a different result, my approach will need to change. Yeah, a little bit of a breakthrough moment here. Where would you go with this? What's your follow-up?
What kind of change are you imagining?
And I think maybe some of like Jacqueline's line could kind of fit really and flow nicely here. What would change look like? How would you feel different? How would your students react to you differently? All right, let's go to the next. Oh, it's jumping. One second. There we go. So how will you move to close this conversation? These are three options to kind of get us a little bit more to closing. Assuming we've probably done more. I'm unpacking in between. I'm just trying to keep to the time. We've got like 5 minutes left. So option A, I'd love to, you could say this, I'd love to connect in a week or so with you to see how things are going. What might you try in your next conversation with this learner that perhaps I can ask you about next time? Option B is, as you reflect on this conversation, what is something useful you might take from this experience with a learner? Option C is, as you reflect on the situation with this learner, what are you trying to protect that you value?
We have 3 B's and 1 not C.
Yeah. We'll talk about more when maybe not C. Yeah. All right, let's go with B. We've got the some reason why. There we go. All right. All right. They say, well, it won't be always easy. Everyone learns differently and needs different support to be successful. So that's kind of what they share back. All right. Okay, so we know that we've been talking about trying to get them going towards their preferred future. Quadrant 1, we got some insight into some things that we heard from the client in terms of their resourceful past. I'm curious if people picked up on some of the things we learned. What are some of the resources that they have and that they've shared?
Well, they're passionate about you know, the end product of looking after clients. So they're passionate about that, and they actually like teaching. And they care enough to reflect upon their actions.
Right. Troubled past, I mean, we obviously heard a lot more on that in terms of what led to the scenario. some very focused past experiences, but particularly with the learner that they're currently supervising, that's coming sort of unprepared. But I mean, we did get insights around their ideas and how they might reconcile that too, around the unprepared learner, and push a little bit there. And that's partially where their dread lies, right? In terms of the future, is that they won't be able to overcome, you know, acquire these skills to be more effective. But I think what makes me hopeful with this client, and I don't know if others are feeling the same as well, from this narrative, is that they're starting to get glimmers that it's going to take some investment and that they can do it because they have this, as Jacqueline said, this passion for it. It's given them more clarity, this conversation with them. So the questions that we looked at were kind of mapping onto this, which is why the last comment about let's not ask that question around what are you trying to protect that you value? Because you're right, that is a question that would have taken us probably down a tangent of having to talk about our dreaded future a lot more. And this is a little bit of a crude mapping because some of the questions and where I place them, one could argue, depending on how the client responded, could be part of their resourceful past as well, especially things that you see in the Q3 area, for example. So thank you for playing with me with this. I hope this was fun. But I want to just open up the conversation around what are some things that are kind of, you know, coming forward for you that you see as opportunities or challenges in this sort of coaching for clinical teaching performance. Again, any questions or curiosities that are surfacing or ideas on how you might apply some of this. So I'm going to stop sharing because I just want to be able to see all of you and to hear from you around some thoughts and ideas in the last 5 minutes that we have. And I saw that Dwayne had added before another resource that they had was that they have a colleague that they can connect with, which is huge. Yes, thank you so much for your participation. I hope that you'll stay in touch. Reach out, please. Thank you.
I think in terms of the topic that you brought to us today, it was an effective way to present it, and it's an effective way to also work with learners. To you know, what are, when we ask this question, what is the likely conversation that follows? When we ask this question, what's the likely conversation that follows? Where do we want to end up? And what question, if we want to end up here with them identifying their strengths and resources and so forth. So it was nice. There was a nice parallel process.
Parallel, you're right. There is totally is a parallel. Like what we did with these scenario turns is exactly the same thing that we could do with learners. I think we often default thinking, okay, we have very limited time. You know, we're in the expert teacher role, and so we need to kind of be directing the conversation a little bit more. But, you know, the conversation that we did in this sort of, I'm granted a little bit of a contrived way, but it was very short and still very effective. The answers did evoke a lot that we could work with and gain new insights. And part of it is that suspending our own kind of predisposition to kind of think about what's going on for that person. Just given our familiarity with their circumstance, sometimes like the separation, the distance is not so great. And so we can easily place ourselves into that position, which then makes us assume that expert role when we really want to be present as a coach or a listening partner. So yeah, you're right, totally parallel processes at play. What I will share, and again, inviting any of you to jump in really, and if you want to prefer to write, please do so. If not, just to reflect on those questions. I want to just share a couple of slides that Serena and I put together about our center in case this is a space in a community that you want to continue to stay connected with. At our center, we actually have established a community of practice for people who do coaching within the clinical teaching context. They may be coaching learners, they may be coaching other faculty, or they may be coaching leaders in academic health professions. So if this is an area of interest, we offer communities of practice free for members of our center, and membership cost is pretty low. So this is just another avenue to stay connected. And I also want to plug some of our programs. At our center, we do a number of longitudinal faculty development programs. So if you actually do have a faculty member who needs teaching support, there are options. So take a look. But we also have a number of workshops on a variety of themes. This particular workshop that you kind of got a little glimpse of is typically a 3-hour workshop that Serena and I offer at our center. And so we usually have a lot more time for practice teaching scenarios and practice kind of coaching scenarios, and peer feedback. It's far more interactive in a way because of the length of time. So if you are interested, you're more than welcome to join us at one of those sessions. So that was it for the formal stuff. But I want to just kind of leave some space if there are any lingering questions. But if not, just thank you so much for your participation, showing up. It's a small but mighty group. And I think I'm like the last before the closing plenary. So thanks for hanging on and making it through these 24 hours.